Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important documents in modern Canadian history, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 Calls to Action. This came out in 2015, and you have to understand this isn't just some dusty report. It's really meant to be a foundational guide for the entire country's path toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples.
These are the very first words of the document, and right away they lay out the mission, plain and simple. It's about two things. One, directly dealing with the deep, painful legacy of the residential school system. And two, figuring out a new way forward for all of Canada.
So you always hear that number, right? 94. But here's the thing that's so crucial to get. These are not 94 separate items on a checklist. Think of it more like a web. They're all interconnected, a comprehensive framework where each call is designed to support the others. The goal is to spark real change at every single level of society.
Okay, so to get our heads around this, we're just going to follow the report's own structure. We'll start by looking at it as a roadmap. Then we'll dig into three huge pillars: redressing the legacy, building a new relationship, and educating Canadians. And finally, we'll see how this whole thing ends up being a call to action for, well, for everyone.
First up, a roadmap for reconciliation. The key idea here is that this isn't a random list of suggestions. No, it's a plan designed to move us from confronting the harms of the past toward building a genuinely different future.
And that takes us straight to the first big pillar, redressing the legacy. This is all about confronting the damage from residential schools, damage that is absolutely still being felt today.
You see, the point that TRC makes over and over is that this legacy isn't just history. Its effects are here, right now, today. They're woven into the very systems that interact with Indigenous families every day. So this pillar calls for concrete systemic reforms in places like child welfare, healthcare, and the justice system.
And these calls are incredibly specific, not vague at all. Take a look at child welfare. Call number 1 goes right at the shocking overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the foster care system. Then you've got call number 3, which demands the full implementation of Jordan's principle. This is so important. It's a simple, child-first rule that says a First Nations kid gets the services they need immediately, without getting tangled up in bureaucratic fights about which government's going to pay for it. The child comes first, period.
And this pillar's reach goes deep into health and justice, too. Call 22, for example, tells the healthcare system to finally recognize and integrate Aboriginal healing practices. Call 28 targets the legal system at its source, requiring all law students to learn about Aboriginal peoples and the law. And Call 30 aims to finally eliminate the staggering, disproportionate number of Indigenous people in custody.
So once you start to address the legacy, where do you go from there? The report pivots to its second huge pillar, forging a completely new relationship. This is about moving past just repair work and actually rebuilding something different from the ground up.
Now, this is where the calls start getting at the very foundations of Canada as a country. We're talking about high-level, nation-to-nation concepts here. The report calls for fundamental changes to the country's legal and even constitutional framework, all to create a real partnership, one that's truly based on mutual respect and the recognition of rights.
Right at the very heart of this pillar is call number 43. This one is a real game changer. It calls on every level of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, to adopt UNDIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as the essential framework for reconciliation. Now, the key point here is that the TRC doesn't see this as just a nice suggestion. They see it as the blueprint for everything that follows.
Call 45 takes this idea even further. It calls for a brand new Royal Proclamation of Reconciliation. This would be a monumental step. It would mean officially rejecting archaic colonial ideas like the doctrine of discovery, that old concept that Europeans could just claim land. It would also commit Canada to UNDRIP, to renewing treaty relationships as the living agreements they were always meant to be, and to begin the hard work of reconciling Indigenous and Crown legal systems.
So how do you make sure all these grand ideas actually lead to action? Accountability. That's what Call 53 is all about. It proposes an independent National Council for Reconciliation.
Its whole job would be to act as a watchdog, to monitor progress and report publicly on how well governments and society are actually doing on this journey.
And all of this leads us to the third critical pillar, educating Canadians. Because the TRC's message here is crystal clear. You can't build a new relationship if people don't understand the history that created the old one. Knowledge is the absolute bedrock.
Now, this isn't just about adding a few paragraphs to a history book. This pillar is really calling for a collective shift in our awareness. It's about making sure every Canadian has a baseline understanding of the history of residential schools, of the treaties, of the contributions of Indigenous peoples, so that we can all play a part in building a better future.
And again, the calls get very practical. Call 62 demands mandatory, age-appropriate curriculum for every single student from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. But it's not just about facts and dates. It also calls for training teachers on how to integrate Indigenous knowledge into their classrooms, and for building those crucial skills in students, things like empathy, intercultural understanding, and mutual respect.
And this educational push goes way beyond the classroom. The calls demand change from our other national institutions too. Call 67 targets museums and archives. Call 86 says journalism schools have to teach this history to future reporters. And Call 57 insists that public servants, the people running government programs, get this training too. It's really about changing the culture inside our most important institutions. Which brings us to one final critical point that ties everything together. The report makes it absolutely clear that this isn't just a job for the government. It's a call to action for all of Canadian society.
And you can see just how broad that call really is. Of course, the government is on the list, but so are the churches that ran the schools. So is the corporate sector. So are media and sports organizations. And ultimately, so are all Canadians. This is framed as a project for everyone.
And to show you just how comprehensive this is, the report has a whole section on, get this, sports and reconciliation. Calls 87 through 91 talk about everything from educating the public about Indigenous athletes to making sure Indigenous protocols are respected at major sporting events. It really does try to touch every part of our shared lives. And the economic piece is critical. Call 92 is aimed squarely at the corporate sector in Canada. It calls on businesses to adopt UNDRP as their own framework for reconciliation. This means things like meaningful consultation, real partnerships, and ensuring that Aboriginal communities get to share in the long-term benefits from projects happening on their lands.
And maybe nothing captures the spirit of this proposed new relationship better than the final call, number 94. It proposes changing Canada's oath of citizenship. The new oath would include a promise to faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including treaties with Indigenous peoples. It's a powerful symbol of what a renewed, more truthful national identity could look like.
So in the end, the 94 calls to action give us a detailed map to a different future. The route is laid out, but the report really leaves all of us with a fundamental question. The map exists, but who is responsible for actually taking the journey?